Let's discuss this further with Dr. Amesh Adalja, a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security. He joins us from Pittsburgh in the U.S. Warm welcome to you to the program. Does waiving vaccine patents solve the problem of getting the vaccines out?
It absolutely does not, because you have to remember this waiver is a process that's going to take several months to unfold. It has to be approved by member countries and is going to be something that, if it does occur, is going to be long after vaccine supply has likely gotten better. What we need to do now is to remove the supply chain disruptions that are going on. There are many countries that have export restrictions, so we can't sell vaccines to some of these countries, can't get vaccines to them. That's what needs to happen. This is sort of a solution in search of a problem, because what we're seeing here is an effort to undermine the whole innovation platform for developing vaccines like the COVID vaccine itself. And I think that precedent is something that is very dangerous and needs to be stopped.
Is this an issue of timing? For example, would this have been fine earlier in the pandemic, or are you saying this shouldn't have been an option at all?
This shouldn't have been an option at all. Intellectual property is basically the cornerstone for how we develop innovative products. And remember, the Moderna vaccine, they've not enforced their patent since the very beginning of their vaccination program. Yet there are no other companies that make the Moderna vaccine. So this really isn't about, to me, access to vaccines because they're being held up. Patents aren't the reason why the world isn't vaccinated. Patents are the reason why we even have COVID-19 vaccines.
We have seen, you mentioned supply chain issues, for example, in the EU, where there simply have not been enough vaccines produced. That is not just an export issue, this is production. So how would that problem be solved?
What we really have to do is prioritize vaccines and have to develop a manufacturing base in countries that need to vaccinate their populations. I think that's not necessarily an intellectual property issue. That's building capacity to be able to have the know-how to manufacture at a rapid pace, to have manufacturing at a high level of quality. It's not something that can be done overnight, and it's not something that you can do just from having the recipe for the Pfizer vaccine.
Views from the developing world say that the idea of waiving patent protection is a step in the right direction. The director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention called the decision, quote, a great act of humanity. Are you saying this is a misguided, would you be saying this is a misguided view?
I do think it is a misguided view. This is very short range, because what many of these ideas kind of are premised on is that these vaccines are just there for the taking, that they don't require effort, that they don't require mental concentration, these are products of people's minds, that they just don't appear. And if we remove those incentives, if we remove the ability of companies to invest and plan and think about how they can offset those risks because they think they're going to get revenue because of the patent protection, who's going to want to innovate in this field anymore? Who's going to want to enter into these agreements during pandemics if at the end this can be just taken away from them? So I think that's what they're not seeing. They're not seeing this long range. And I think that's what we have to really combat, because if we lose the ability to innovate and have the biopharmaceutical companies develop products that all our lives depend on, we're all going to be worse off. I think we can solve COVID-19 without violating intellectual property rights.
You're talking about these companies, but they did receive public support. They did receive government funding. So it's not just that they've, come up from their labs and had everything without extra outside support. So there is the argument that they should be able to at least cede some of what they own back to the public. And especially, the U.S. Trade Representative saying these are extraordinary circumstances in this pandemic, calling for extraordinary measures.
So when you look at the U.S. companies, yes, there were taxpayer funds used for advanced purchase agreements, but that's not the same thing as actually having a claim to the patent. And those companies that engaged in Operation Warp Speed they were told that their intellectual property was going to be secure, that this wasn't something that the U.S. was going to fail to defend if necessary. And I think that's an important point, that you cannot go back after the fact and say, now we're going to seize your intellectual property or not defend your intellectual property. There may be certain circumstances, maybe the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, where there was a clear use of government funds to develop the technology that was instrumental in the patent that was used. But that's not the case for every one of these vaccines. And I think they need to be thought of as on a case-by-case basis. But in general, I would say that if you're a government and you're forcing those companies to only sell to you, and that's what those advanced purchase agreements did, because there were export restrictions in the United States, then you cannot then say that that's the reason for why we're going to not defend your property rights.
Okay, Dr. Amesh Adalja from the Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security. Thank you.
Thank you.